Okay, let's start. Dear God of heaven and earth, we thank you for this day, this week, this year. We know that we're closer than ever before to the second advent. And we just are asking that you will help each of us to navigate the time between now and then, when Jesus comes again. And we want to continue learning and allow you to be our teacher. Be with those of us that have gathered in and be with those that haven't been able to. Keep us all safe, Lord, and restore in us the joy of your salvation and restore us physically, mentally, emotionally, and that we truly may be used by you in the closing moments of this earth's history. Thank you and be with us now. In Jesus' name, amen. Yes. And I want to begin with just a quick little bit of review. And so we've been going through the Australian Vespers and that Elder Tess did at the beginning of, the first half of 2022, because it spanned a number of weeks, also months. And the overarching theme is the Sunday law, as Katya brought out the very first session in our midweek studies. And it's the determination of what will the Sunday law look like, what is going to be happening. And the studies have brought us to the place where looking at us shifting from the right to the left, right, been on the right from 1989 to 2018, and then shifting in 2018 until the present to the left. And why? And in order to unpack why, it was expedient that we also come to understand what the right and what the left each stand for, what they believe in. And that brought us to the ethos of the right and the ethos of the left, and unpacking that quite a lot more. And basically to get to the heart, to the character of what the right and the left are like. And it was interesting because Elder Tess put it in the terms of how would they describe themselves? And that puts just a little different nuance on it in terms of, for example, that word patriarchal. Would one side describe themselves as being patriarchal? Would both sides? Or, and obviously we have an answer to that, but at the same time, some of the words that we want to use to describe right or left sometimes can, in a sense, be derogatory, or sometimes can be how they would not necessarily see themselves, portray themselves. And so it's interesting as we have unpacked it quite a lot more. And as we need to understand both, and we work through learning to, pardon me, read laterally and to sift our sources, even on the left, but at the same time, changing one's political ideology is not easy. And Elder Tess brings this out, that so much is so deep-rooted that to pluck it up, to consider, agricultural model, like weeds, you want to pull them out, but to even consider changing sometimes is very painful for some people. They don't want to go there. And so in many cases, it can be not necessarily an easy step to make that change. And which is why throughout much of 2019, the studies sort of built, but also repeated a lot, and trying, in a sense, to get people used to the idea, used to the new concepts. And of course, we use that example of women in the summer of 2019 starting to wear trousers, pants. And even at that, there were many that drew back and couldn't make that step, or I could almost say leap, in a sense. And but it became clear that if we are going to be a line of success, remaining with this movement that is a line of success, second only to Christ's line as the only other line of success, if we are going to be a part of that line of success, we have to make the shift. And we also understand the whys and wherefores of why we're shifting. And we worked through 4 aspects, 4 topics, if you like, that Elder Tess distilled it down to help explain the shift. And this is just review. We've already been through them. So we have to understand the complexity of history and the background leading up to the moral majority, which was in existence 1979 to 1989, but a lot of spillover, and the connection of the moral majority to a political party, particularly the Republican Party, and how, in essence, politicalized Protestantism. And I know certainly in the years in the 70s and 80s, I was very aware of basically that very concept, the politicalization of Sunday keepers, the Sunday keeping community. And but politicalized Protestantism took us back to the Great Awakening, and even before, to the time of the end, 1798, and all of that history. And it's spanned, in essence, if we go back, far enough, a good 240 years. So it's not just simply to do with the moral majority and its 10-year history it's all the ripple effect. And where did that all come from? How did we get to that point that a political party became so religious, and a religious entity became so political? So that was the first thing. The second thing is Pyrrhus representing the king of the south. And that's tucked away in Daniel 8:8, of course. Daniel's omitting some of the history, some of the noise, as he's dealing with the generals and so on. But Pyrrhus is king of the south, representing king of the south, and understanding particularly the Battle of Ipsus, and that it represents the 2016 election, and that 2016 election was a pivotal turning point in American history. Third item, and there's actually overlap in a sense, because these aren't just cut and dried, isolated aspects of what we have to understand, but they're all interrelated and connected. One thing led to another, and as we said last week, the all of the various topics and information and so on, it all coalesced in one central point, and the Midnight Cry messages, and it became sort of the center of everything we were coming to understand. But the two streams of information and the symbolic term CNN on the right, Fox on the left, symbolic of far more than just those two entities, news sources, with only the one stream being the correct one. And we came to understand that we're in an information war. Now it's sort of shifted more to a culture war, but with the progression of the methods of warfare over history, bringing us down to, yes, in modern day, 21st century day, it's actually weapons of warfare are information. And with the advent of social media and AI, we see that more and more today. But, and that in 1996, there was a formalization internally, Time of the End magazine, but also externally, these two streams of information represented by CNN and Fox. And so there was an external formalization. Each of them, one on the right, one on the left, formalized their ideology as well. And then the fourth one was the line of the Nephilim, how they're being prepared, plowed, early rained, latter rained, and eventually harvested, not by, well, pardon me, I'll just leave it at plowed, early rained, latter rained, but not by us. And the key point there to keep in mind is that God is preparing them because God is preparing the whole world. And it's not just us. God is working, preparing the whole world. And the group that we call out is the group of Nephilim. And but it's as much God preparing everybody ready for the Sunday law, that they understand and that they will decide aright, and decisions they're making now are affecting the outcome of where they will stand as the Sunday law comes to pass. And it's not an actual one law, and it's not an actual point in time, Sunday law, as we know, but it's a whole period of time, this dispensation of the agitation of the Sunday law, culminating in more evidence of Sunday law being there. And we may not, many others will not even be aware, oh, this is a Sunday law. In essence, it will be business as usual, working, sleeping, eating, life going on, but at the same time, there will be evidence that the Sunday law is in place. And I put down in my notes a sentence: the whole is profound. Information from every direction coalescing around the Midnight Cry messages. And I'm not sure how clearly you'll be able to see on the whiteboard, but I wanted to put in the two lines, the first group, and in essence, it's the third group, because the priests, 1989 up to 2021, and there's the formalization at 1996 with Time of the End magazine. And for the Nephilim, their plowing began in 2014. Plowing, early rain, latter rain. and then the harvest, with the close of probation being the Daniel 12:1, close of probation upon the world. And everyone's set as to which side they're on, and Jacob's time of trouble begins. I'm going to share screen quickly just to do a quick, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything I wanted to say. I'm sure I did. That's interesting. Anyway, let's just see this. Okay, so essential. Okay. So there was Elder Tess taking us through the from 1888 on and all of that complex history, internal history, but even European history, 1848, all the way through. There's a lot of complexity of history internally as well as externally. But and then the mention of the lateral reading, sifting of sources, and then the four aspects that we're sort of keeping in the forefront, and that we had to shift because staying on the right was untenable. It was not what we knew God supported. And then the ethos of the left and the ethos of the right. And there was some brainstorming being done, and some of the ideas brought forward were not necessarily full-fledged ones, but one of the big ones was this aspect of big government and small government. And in a sense, there was an issue this past week in the news, and possibly nobody caught it, but Toronto has, and Katya's there tonight, even as we speak, but Toronto has passed a new law that is going to enable rooming houses to exist legally. That's the nuts and bolts of it. And where in the past people with suites, or that had, I'll just say multiple, say a situation of university students, multiple students staying, because everyone got their own bedroom, but it was all one dwelling and so on. All of these different situations that are generally viewed as being illegal situations. Zoning isn't correct, and municipalities don't take kindly to it and all the rest. Anyway, some steps have been put in place whereby a lot of the restrictions are going to be lifted. But one of the comments that was made in the news report was to the effect that the hiring of new employees to oversee, monitoring of this, that they want to ensure that any, I'll just say legal suites, any rooming house situations are safe for the people who are going to be renting there, and that everything's being done properly. And I couldn't help but think, I mean, that's a very good case in point with the housing crisis in Canada, every province all across. That's a good case of where big government is needed, and what it's for is, again, sort of that protecting people, minorities. A lot of immigrants are the ones staying in rooming house situations. They actually highlighted a lady from Sri Lanka, older lady, and she said, that's the only place I can live. Otherwise, I'll be on the streets. And so big government versus small government, very good, important situation. Anyway, yes, I'm not going to go over the whole list again, because we need to move on with some of the other court cases and so on tonight. Anyway, the hypothetical illustration that Elder Test began with, a construction store owner, and then because he was working in that industry, mainly a male dominant industry and so on, and because he's possibly a little bit sexist, he did not want to hire any women. And then the question was asked, is it a woman's freedom to work there? And the answer being, it's not her freedom, because she doesn't have the freedom to work there, but it's a matter of equality, to be able to be treated equally to the men who would be applying for that job, to be treated equally, and to be shown the same opportunities, the same privileges. I mean, granted, it still would come down to experience and skills and, some of the other things and so on. But in a situation where government puts laws in place to protect the equality of minority groups, or of all, really, it's a case that the discrimination against somebody can't happen, at least not as easily, simply because of one's sex or age or color of skin or socioeconomic status or whatever it happens to be. Anyway, there were a couple of other illustrations that were brought to mind. And anyway, I'm going to leave that because we went through it last time. And anyway, I think that is it. So now going on with, I want to first of all mention, I'll put it up on the whiteboard perhaps, which one is, we'll come to it. In 2014, there was a case Burwell, does anybody remember the name of it? Hobby Lobby. Was it Inc? No, Hobby Lobby Stores. And it was interesting that evidently it's a craft store, chain of stores, 21,000 plus, probably by now 25,000, whatever, employees scattered all over, and owned by the Green family. A son has some stores, and I'm not sure how many in the family, but it's basically a family enterprise. And it was actually a case that there was a Mennonite family-run business as well that sort of got combined with the Hobby Lobby case at one point. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So and that was a family-run business as well, interestingly. So the U.S. Supreme Court made a ruling that privately held for-profit corporations are exempt from a regulation that its owners religiously object to, if, and this is the caveat, if there is a less restrictive means of furthering the law's interest, according to the provisions of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. I'm going to have us look at that in a moment or two. So privately held for-profit corporations to be exempt from regulations that if somebody has a religious objection to something, an owner of that corporation, they don't have to do it, kind of thing. And two key points. For the first time, the Supreme Court, I mean, this is really quite astounding, which is why it was such an earth-shattering case. For the first time, a for-profit corporation's claim of religious belief was recognized by the Supreme Court. In other words, in their reading, and there's some other things I might even actually read it a little bit, but they're almost giving personhood to a corporation, for-profit, privately held corporation, because they're saying that corporation has a religious belief. Anyway, second point, with a 5-4 majority, and that's only privately held corporations, not publicly held corporations. With a 5-4 majority, and of course it was justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor that were the dissenting opinion. Although a couple of the other Republican ones did join, just not accepting one part of the ruling, but whatever, that the contraceptive mandate be struck down. The regulation adopted by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, under the Obamacare, it's often referred to as, but Affordable Care Act. And what that provision was, so the Supreme Court struck it down, but this contraceptive mandate is that employers are required to cover certain contraceptives for their female employees. And the bottom line is, and we're going to see more of this, I think, unfolding yet, but the bottom line of it is that many of the Christian beliefs of different people, including the owners of this for-profit corporation, believe that, for example, IUDs, was it L pill? ELLE? I'm trying to remember the name of it, whatever. Different forms of contraception were like abortions. And so for religious reasons, they were against contraceptives. Anyway, one other thing I'll say, the decision does not address, and this is sort of how some of these things continue on. This is 2014, and we'll see there's a couple of other cases that one of the ones that Elder Test brings out. The decision does not address whether such corporations are protected by the free exercise of religion cause of the First Amendment of the Constitution. Of course, the Bill of Rights consists of the first 10 amendments, including the First Amendment to the Constitution. And then there's another 11 through 27 amendments to the Constitution. But the Bill of Rights includes the 1 through 10 amendments. And the court said that the mandate, the contraceptive mandate, was not the least restrictive way to ensure access to contraceptive care, noting that a less restrictive alternative was being provided by religious nonprofits until the court issued an injunction on that 3 days later, after the Hobby Lobby store's decision by the Supreme Court. So all of a sudden now there's an injunction on religious nonprofits providing contraceptive care. And they replaced it with a government-sponsored alternative for any employees of privately held corporations that do not want to provide birth control. So they put in place for the privately held companies after this injunction a government alternative where privately held companies do not want to offer contraceptive services to their employees. And the, I always want to say Obamacare, but the Affordable Care Act, with Trump possibly winning the election after winning the Republican nomination, but big likelihood that he could possibly will probably win the November election. And high on his priority list is getting rid of Obamacare. It was a priority of him in his first term, but didn't succeed, but at any rate. And I want to read, and I'm sorry, this is going to be a little bit of reading just for a moment, but I want you to listen to the comments being made on this Hobby Lobby decision. Ian Millhiser from Vox argued that as a general rule in religious liberty cases prior to the Hobby Lobby decision, religion can't be used to diminish the rights of others. He pointed to the 1982 U.S. Supreme Court case, United States v. Lee, in which the court declared when followers of a particular sect enter into commercial activity as a matter of choice, the limits they accept on their own conduct as a matter of conscience and faith are not to be superimposed on the statutory schemes which are binding on others in that activity. According to Millhiser, the Hobby Lobby decision marks the first time rights of religious believers, so freedom, right, could trump the rights of others. So Hobby Lobby, freedoms of some, particularly in the case of religious believers, could erase the rights of others. And we would view that as their equality, even, not just simply their rights. Marcia Greenberger, co-president of the National Women's Law Center, argued in the same direction Millhiser took by saying that the Supreme Court has never ruled that companies have religious beliefs. SCOTUS has never ruled a company, a corporation of any sort, public or private, has religious beliefs. But that's exactly what they ruled in Hobby Lobby. And that it has never held that religious exercise provides a license to harm others or violate the rights of third parties. And then an ACL director said, religious freedom gives us all the right to hold our beliefs, but it doesn't give you the right to impose your beliefs on others, to discriminate against others. And it was interesting, even a religious individual, a pastor, Interfaith Alliance pastor, said, the First Amendment is at its best when it is used to protect the rights of minorities from the whims of the powerful. Today's decision, back in 2014, Hobby Lobby, which gives the powerful the right to force their religious beliefs on those around them, is a far cry from the best traditions of religious freedom. So this 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA, so it's said as, just the letters, RFRA, just a couple of interesting factoids. Introduced in March 1923 in the House of Representatives by Congressman Chuck Schumer, Democrat representative of New York. And a companion bill was introduced the same day in the Senate by Senator Ted Kennedy, a Democrat from Massachusetts. And RFRA requires strict scrutiny when a neutral law of general applicability substantially burdens and I never cut and pasted the rest of the sentence in, so whatever. But the key there is strict scrutiny. And this was one of the things Chuck Schumer was very much in favor of to protect, in a sense, which is why he brought the bill forward. But the other interesting thing is a unanimous House, so House of Representatives, congressmen and women, people, and almost a unanimous Senate. So only 3 senators opposed it, passed the bill, and President Bill Clinton signed it into law, 1993. And originally it applied to both federal and state laws, RFRA, but in 1997, the U.S. Supreme Court struck it down and said that it doesn't have any authority it's unconstitutional for states to be included. So it applies only to federal laws now. And in response, 21 individual states have passed state religious freedom restoration acts. So they've passed their own state religious freedom restoration acts that apply to state governments and local municipalities. And any of the rest of that, and just very quickly looking at the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So it has broad protection for the rights of free speech and free press. And free speech, this free and public expression of opinions without censorship, interference, or restraint by the government. Free press, the right of individuals to express themselves through publication and dissemination of information, ideas, and opinions without interference, constraint, or prosecution by the government. So again, 2 points. Point 1, the speech covered protects what a person says as well as how a person expresses themselves. Therefore, the term freedom of speech embedded in the First Amendment encompasses the decision what to say as well as what not to say. And the second point, the level of protections with respect to free speech and free press, given by the First Amendment is not limitless. And then a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court back in time, stated in his concurring opinion, numerous holdings of this court attest to the fact that the First Amendment does not literally mean that we are, quote unquote, guaranteed guaranteed the right to express any thought free from government censorship. This statement is subject to some qualifications. And hate speech, discriminatory speech, examples like that. And it was interesting, just as a little side note, that sort of shows a little bit the influence of society and culture on law. According to the US Supreme Court, the First Amendment's protection of free speech does not apply to obscene speech. I always remember one time I was in a school setting in Red Deer, and an RCMP constable was there as the school liaison person, and he was giving a presentation and speaking to a group of probably about 45, 50 students brought in from several classes. And at one point, he made mention of a nearby recreation center facility, swimming pool, the Collicut Center. And he made mention, he said, if I'm walking by and I'm hearing you and your friends there out on the concrete, the entrance there and so on, and you're joking around and so on, and you're busy swearing a blue streak, he said, I'll come up to you and I'm going to ticket you. He said, I may give you a warning the first time, but he said, that is unacceptable. And it was interesting because you could tell most of the students were pretty shocked. And I was thinking to myself, I thought, well, I wonder how many times that actually happens, but whatever. Anyway, therefore, both the federal government and the states have tried to prohibit or otherwise restrict obscene speech, in particular, the form that is now called pornography. Obscenity is defined by the Miller test. It's sort of a three-pronged test. Is a type of speech which is not legally protected. It is speech to which all of the following three aspects apply. It appeals to the prurient interest. It depicts or describes sexual conduct in a patently offensive way. And the third aspect, it lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Anyway, definition of the test that can be done to determine if something is obscene speech. As of 2019, pornography, except for child pornography, is in practice free of governmental restrictions in the United States. Though pornography about extreme sexual practices is occasionally prosecuted. 1900, no tolerance. 2000, near total tolerance. And so it comes down to changes in society, more acceptable culture, court cases that have sort of morphed the definitions of obscenity and even pornography over time. So it's the legal tolerance also reflects changed social attitudes. One reason there are so few prosecutions for pornography is that juries will not convict. So anyway, so now we're going to come to the case that the hypothetical case that Elder Tess was using was based on. She didn't give it away initially. She introduced it after she'd already gone through all of the discussion in terms of ethos of the right, ethos of the left, and the example, the hypothetical example of the construction materials store and the owner, and bringing out, does he have the right? Doesn't he have the right? Does a woman have the right, the freedom to work there, and so on? So, anyone remember the name of the case? Well, I printed up here. You can call it out if you know. Masterpiece Cake Shop. That one's the limited one. And actually, well, I'll put in and it was versus the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. And in this case, what the well, I'm jumping ahead, perhaps. I'll come to that in a second. So this case was a situation of a man owning a cake shop and baking cakes. And a gay couple came in, and even though same-sex marriage was still illegal in Colorado at the time, originally in 2012 was when it all started, they were going to go to Massachusetts and get married there. And they wanted to have a cake baked after their marriage. When they came back, they wanted to be able to celebrate with family and friends, and they wanted a cake baked, and had gone to this Masterpiece Cake Shop to place their order. And at any rate, they were told, no, I don't believe in same-sex marriage. We don't do cakes for gay couples, and I can send you down the street, but we're not going to do it. And so because Colorado has anti-discrimination laws and anti-discrimination act, actually, the couple went to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission and placed a complaint. And the commission ended up ruling that in favor of the gay couple, and gave lots of stringent parameters for the cake shop that they had to abide by, and retrain their staff, and etc. And they had to be willing to bake cakes for in essence anybody. And so, and I'll just read what the Anti-Discrimination Act in Colorado, what it basically prohibits. It prohibits businesses open to the public from discriminating against their customers on the basis of race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. So pretty clear cut. And so the Civil Rights Commission rules in their favor. And of course, the baker, the cake shop owner, appeals. And it's interesting who he ends up having defend him is the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, and you'll maybe remember that name. Interestingly, in the Hobby Lobby case, as I said, there was another case that was dovetailed on involving a Mennonite family that had a business, and they were represented by the Alliance Defending Freedom in their case in 2014. So now ADF, the Alliance Defending Freedom, is defending the baker in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. And his appeal with his lawyers, ADF lawyers, gets shot down by the Colorado Court of Appeals. And then not only that, but this Colorado Supreme Court refuses to take on the case, hear any more appeals or anything. So the baker, probably with ADF advising, puts it forward to the Supreme Court, requesting a review, the US, the federal Supreme Court now, requesting a review. And basically, this is what it boiled down to, what they said in their request to the Supreme Court. For review of the question, and this is the question, whether applying Colorado's public accommodations law to compel the baker to create expression that violates his sincerely held religious beliefs about marriage violates the free speech or free exercise clauses of the US Constitution's First Amendment. So they're going on the grounds of free speech. His expression, baking a wedding cake, is his own artistic free expression, and it's covered therefore by the First Amendment, right? This is sort of the question they're throwing at the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court. And in a 6-2 vote, and it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor that are the dissenting opinion. The Supreme Court orders a reversal of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission earlier decision and the Colorado Court, Appeals Court earlier decision. Anyway, and it was interesting because Supreme Court Justice Kennedy's opinion noted that he may have been inclined to rule in favor of the commission if they had remained religiously neutral in their evaluation. And this was the whole thing of how he noted also in his case that it was hostility towards the baker made by the commission as to the reason why the Supreme Court reversed the earlier ruling. In other words, in favor of the baker. But because of the existence of this hostility in the current case, the Supreme Court could not rule on the broader issue regarding anti-discrimination law and the free exercise of religion. So they weren't willing to tackle does someone's equality come above somebody else's freedom? So it remained unanswered. And that Alliance Defending Freedom, I just want to very quickly speak on it for a couple of minutes. It was founded in 1994 by members of the Christian right to prevent what its founders saw as threats to religious liberty in American society. So 6 names: Bill Bright, Campus Crusade for Christ; Larry Burkett, a evangelical financial advisor. I'd heard of him with the knowing anything about him years back, but James Dobson, founder of Focus on the Family. D. James Kennedy, basically a pastor who founded a ministries that eventually got named after him. And Marlon Maddow, radio host, Christian radio host, and Alan Sears, who became president of the Alliance Defense Fund. That was the original name. So he was president right from its inception, 1994 to 2017. And he was the executive director of the Attorney General under Ronald Reagan as president, the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography, which got commonly known as the Meese Commission, 1985, 1986. So he was involved with that. A Catholic lawyer, and he was one of the driving forces on the Alliance Defense Fund, it was originally known as. 2012, it got changed to Alliance Defending Freedom. Why? Name change? Originally, they basically provided financial assistance to lawyers as an Alliance Defense Fund. But now they were shifting to a focus from that to instead also directly litigate cases. So bring cases forward themselves, bring them to trial. And so they changed the name to Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF. You'll recognize a few names affiliated, some kind of connection. Mike Johnson, former ADF lawyer, elected Speaker of the House October 25th, 2023, replacing Kevin McCarthy. Mike Pence, former vice president during Trump's first presidency, obviously, 2016 to 2020. Jeff Sessions, former attorney general, 2017 and 2018, under Trump's first presidency. William Barr, former attorney general during George H.W. Bush's presidency, 1991 to 1993, and also during Trump's first presidency, 2019 to 2020. He replaced Jeff Sessions. Amy Coney Barrett, lawyer, justice on the Supreme Court. Josh Hawley, Republican senator from Missouri, who's in the news on various occasions, being very extreme right, sometimes getting what he speaks, getting him into trouble. And Michael Farris, a lawyer who was president of the ADF after Alan Sears from 2017 to 2023, who founded Patrick Henry College in the year 2000, a highly rated Christian institution whose mission is to prepare Christian men and women who will lead, quote unquote, who will lead our nation and shape our culture with timeless biblical values and fidelity to the spirit of the American founding. And Michael Farris also, of course, founded the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, HSLDA, in 1983. He himself has a family, wife. He and his wife have 10 children. And he was one of the ones that said Christians need to have as many quivers or arrows in their quiver as possible. I have as many children as possible. And he set a good example that he highly spoke to many times, having 10 children. During Trump's first presidency, ADF had become one of the most influential groups informing the Trump administration's attack on LGBTQ rights. And then another case, and I'm just going to finish off with here. 2023. Yeah. 303 Creative. LLC. Incorporated. V. Elenus. And I think, Allie, I remember you talking about this one a little bit one time, or I might be wrong, it might have been somebody else. But facts of the case. It was brought before the Supreme Court, and it was a decision that dealt with the intersection, rather, of anti-discrimination law in public accommodations with the free speech clause of the First Amendment being the defense. So in a 6-3 decision, the court, SCOTUS, Supreme Court, the court found decided in favor of the website designer, ruling that the state of Colorado cannot compel the designer to create work that violates her values. And this sort of picks up on after Masterpiece Cake Shop, another court case dealing with similar conflict between free speech rights and Colorado's anti-discrimination laws. But it was decided on narrower grounds. And both cases, court cases, involve questions of whether a U.S. state's anti-discrimination laws can require designers to create works that recognize same-sex marriages when same-sex marriage conflicts with those designers' beliefs. So freedom versus equality. The decision in 303 Creative was seen by some as a victory for free speech rights, as well as religious liberty, and seen by others as a setback for LGBTQ rights and an assertion of discrimination as a type of free speech. So in other words, you can discriminate in your speech. It becomes free speech for you, even if it's discriminatory of others. And it's quite honestly astounded me how I know there's supposedly a gag order in place yet again on Donald Trump, but how he's able to just continue being so insulting and so derogatory and targeting different people, whether a judge or whether a judge's daughter or a wife or a court clerk or all these different cases. He mouths off about people who are involved. And, you know, even though he gets a gag order, he so far still hasn't realized. I think he did end up having an extra $5,000 fine, or actually, yeah, I don't think that was it for him breaking the gag order, but whatever. So timeline in brief of the 303 Creative case. 2015, a woman made a wedding website, didn't have any Christian messaging in it whatsoever. And she ended up making a website for a heterosexual couple in 2015. This was 6 months before she filed anything in 2016. In 2016, she files her first suit being against the Colorado anti-discriminatory law. And by 2022, it had been taken as high as the Supreme Court. And in 2023, 2023, the Supreme Court ruled in her favor. And I'm not going to read much of this. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor again had the dissenting decision. And she wrote that the decision grants a business open to the public a constitutional right now to refuse to serve members of a protected class. By this decision, they were giving constitutional weight to somebody being able to discriminate against a protected class. And that under the majority's reasoning, stationers and photographers could be allowed to turn down clients on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So it was a lot of commenters, as well as obviously Justice Sotomayor, seeing precedent and where all is this going to be taken to. Let's see. And this is a director for the Center for Gender and Sexuality Law at Columbia Law School, called the ruling sweeping, and that it used the First Amendment to override anti-discrimination laws for protected classes in general. And it was an interesting little bit of information that came out that, in a sense, there is something a little fishy about this whole case. And she evidently had said that she'd had a request by a gay couple, a gay person, to create a website, wedding website, and she wanted to offset. She didn't want to get caught breaking the law. So she ended up going forward and filing a case just to see what would happen. Anyway, it turns out that let's see, she did say that she'd received an actual request a few days after she'd put in the filing, but she said she never responded to the request, and that it had stated that she feared she would violate Colorado's law if she were to do so. However, the information she provided, that this request had been made by somebody, a person, it was filled out online, and it belonged to a man who has long been married to a woman, not LGBTQ, and who stated that he never submitted such a request. But bottom line is, with all of this whole kerfuffle and boy, some of these things coming out, the court ended up saying it wouldn't have affected. And so they basically stuck to their decision. So I wanted to just quickly review, if I'll play the test for a moment. If you were going to summarize the difference between freedom and equality, how would you do it? we'll maybe do it just simply as a little bit of a brain. The ethos of the right, freedom. The ethos of the left, equality. And it's a little more complex than just even understanding what is equality, what is freedom. Because it's when there's intersection, it's when freedom and equality collide. So, don't want to put anybody on the spot. Any volunteers, or at least to get us started? Henry, do you have any thoughts? If you were talking, Henry, we're not hearing. I'm not sure if you're muted or if your headset isn't working again. Okay, no response from Henry. Any thoughts from anybody? How would you explain to somebody the difference between equality and freedom? Allie, any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what kind of freedom are we talking about? False freedom or true freedom?
Okay,
Because
what
most
are
of
you?
the world believes in
Let's go
false
ahead.
freedom. Sorry, most of the world, I'm gonna assume a huge broad number, most of the world probably believes in false freedom. Freedom that in our movement we do not agree with, right? For example, the truck convoy last year all across Canada. That was false freedom. And that's so if we're going to talk about freedom, what freedom are we talking about? Sorry.
Well, Allie, in a sense, freedom is a good thing.
It
There
is,
are
of course.
people on the right and the left that would agree freedom can be good. And we would agree. But what it comes down to, there's a tension between equality and freedom. And where the tension arises from is when the two clash, the two collide. And some of these court cases, that's exactly what ends up happening. And big government, and even I'll say a Supreme Court that supports big government, I mean, they're going to be neutral, supposedly neutral, but right now we've got a right-leaning US Supreme Court because they've got the preponderance of Republicans on the Supreme Court, right? So every vote, they can get the majority vote just by all voting the same way. And the Democrats only, it's 6-3, 9 in total, and it's 3 only on the left side, I guess I'll say, much as they're supposed to be neutral, but it's 6 on the Republican side, so it definitely does create a lopsided vote, depending. Oh, okay, so it's when they collide, and the principle of a big government, on the left supporting big government, is they operate on the principle of equality. Small government, you don't need many people to run things. If you've got a small government, you don't have laws that are checking up on whether people are making hate speech declarations on social media or wherever at a rally. And so you aren't needing the same number of civil servants, you aren't needing the same number of people involved. And less restrictions, less, you know, you don't need people when you've got small government, the idea being, people sort of police themselves and good will win out, kind of thing. We don't need government breathing down our necks, telling us what to do and how to behave and all those kinds of things. And you brought in the trucker convoy, Canadian trucker convoy, AKA known by them as Freedom Convoy. And you use the expression false freedom. Really, what they were supporting was situation where their freedom not to have mask mandates, not to have to socially distance, not to have to wear masks, not to have closures of churches and closures of businesses and so on, not to have to be quarantined when you arrive back in Canada after you've been on a holiday down to wherever, and you come back in and having to quarantine in a hotel and no, none of that. None of that. They wanted freedom, and so they're promoting their rights, correct? And the only
Yeah.
difficulty is, in essence, what they were wanting to put freedom above is equality for everybody else. In that situation, dealing with COVID, I mean, you could talk about people with weakened immune systems, immunocompromised, uh, or people who have life-threatening conditions that COVID-19 would be lethal for, or just different things. In other words, they saw their rights being threatened by government protocols and so on. And of course, they attribute a lot of it to the Liberals, Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister. The buck stopped with him. And so they were not wanting to see their freedoms tampered with at all, threatened or eradicated. So fear of losing their own freedoms. Whereas in many cases, how we saw it was in terms of equality for all, that, for example, COVID protocols are necessary because you do have people who are vulnerable and at whatever age, young, old, whatever, and therefore what you were describing as false freedom, you were seeing that as, for example, the truckers convoy as being an example of false freedom. Is that correct, Ali?
Yeah, exactly. Oh no,
So
I was
what is
just
an
putting that
example of true freedom?
true freedom. Huh, I don't know. I don't
Well,
know.
if I can, and I'm just talking off the top of my head now too, but if I can suggest that everybody has freedoms, everybody does. We all have freedoms. Um, but where my freedoms go up to, I'm free to choose this or that. I'm free to, go here or there. I'm free. But at the same time, if uh, I impinge on somebody else's freedoms or I cause harm to somebody, and in some cases, some on this side actually will draw the line there that, can't harm somebody else. That's sort of the only restriction perhaps that they would have in place. Um, in other words, my freedom, if you like, my rights end as soon as somebody else's pick up, because that other person has freedom, they have rights, and I can't trample over another person's freedom. And this is what these court cases, in a sense, that's exactly what's happening. Somebody who's, and this was the example Elder Tess brought out at the beginning part of Vespers 4, somebody with their own money, their own time, they have a business, they own it, possibly named it, uh, it's theirs. Don't they have the right to hire who they want, to serve who they want? If they don't believe in same-sex marriage, gay marriage, they don't have to serve those people, sell to those people. Is that the case? I mean, Colorado has put an anti-discriminatory act in place for that very reason, and other states have done it across Canada as well, that to protect the rights of the minorities that would get no service, wouldn't be hired, wouldn't be based on somebody else's beliefs. And I mean, even the Burwell v. Hobby Lobby stores Inc., the contraceptive mandate, because an owner believes such and such, anti-abortion, anti sex outside of marriage, anti-LGBTQ, anti, this, that, and the other, anti-transgender, and that they can go ahead and prevent something that was to be applied to everybody under Obamacare, that contraception would be made available by employers, paying a portion. I think the government paid a portion as well, and that they were free as owners to decide that. No, I'm not going to provide for any of my female employees, probably the male employees as well, but I don't know, condoms or whatever. Anyway, I don't think it was a sexist thing, but it was particularly to do with contraception. So is that something that is allowed? It's allowed under freedom, because nobody has the right to tell somebody else, oh, you can have to do this, you have to, only under big government, under equality, where the protections are put in place, all being able to be treated fairly and equally before the law and in businesses with service, hiring, no discrimination based on race, age, sex, sexual orientation, race, any discriminatory aspect. Anyway, thank you, Ali. That was a good question, and I'm not sure that I answered or anything, but this will be an ongoing thing. As I say, I think we'll see more things developing along this vein in 2024, even with some of these other court cases. Anyway, we've gone over time, so I'm going to close with prayer. Thank you so much for tuning in, and it was a little drier because I was covering some of the court cases, but at any rate, thank you for being here, and let's close with prayer. Dear God of heaven and earth, we thank you so much for helping us to clear off the cobwebs and to grapple with these complex issues because they are not simple, that we may understand the distinction, because we know, Lord, that the Sunday law is going to be comprised of all of these issues. And we want to come to understand more deeply. We want to be people of equality. We want to be radical feminists. We want to be able to treat others and to think as you think and as you treat others. And we just ask that you'll continue to be with us, keep us safe, and bring us back on Sabbath. We ask and pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. I will stop the recording.